and literally the Blackwater River took house and the whole 9 yards.
There's this raging snowstorm going on outside.
Oh, well, we have to row this short stretch across the Matole River.
So I had to drive really slow to get there as the ice was accumulating and there were all these warnings.
Of course, I want to be there for you, but, I've got to figure out how I'm going to get to you because my street is flooded.
I'm Augustine Colebrook, midwife, mentor, muse. I like to inspire others to create. I like to capture magic in the form of storytelling. And it inspired me to create this mini-series. So if you're a regular listener, we're on a break between season 3 and season 4, and I've created a 4-part mini-series for you called Midwives and the Elements. We're going to listen in as midwives tell their stories of triumph, sometimes tragedy, challenge, and perseverance. We're going to listen midwives tell the story of their work as they go from home to home, braving their way to birth centers and clinics around the country, serving families and mothers in their hour of need. And this first episode, we're going to start with the element water.
The water element has introspective qualities. It's often referred to as the philosopher in traditional Chinese medicine. This element fosters modesty and sensibility. Water is associated with wisdom, stamina, and endurance. Water is available in the most abundant form on Earth and even in our bodies. Geographically, 71% of the Earth's surface is water, which includes all forms of oceans, lakes, streams, and rivers. And even our body is made of 70% water. Historically speaking, most civilizations were established near water sources. The Nile is called the lifeline of Egypt, and the Greeks worshipped the water god Poseidon. In Hindu culture, the river Ganga is considered spiritual in India, and people take a dip in it to purify themselves. Christians perform a baptism in holy water. Ancient Jewish traditions ask its people to spiritually cleanse in a mikvah bath on special occasions, and Muslims perform absolution or wudu with water before their prayer. And of course, midwives use water at most births in terms of showers, hot compresses, and water birth tubs. But sometimes water is in an abundance. Sometimes there's so much water in the form of liquid or solid that it makes it challenging for midwives to travel, and they must brave this element in weather that would make most of us stay inside. Sam Balter once said, "Nothing sticks in your head better than a story. It can express the most complex ideas in the most digestible ways." Storytelling has been an important part of our lives since the beginning of human history. It has allowed people to make sense of the world and derive its deeper meaning. So please join the stories that follow from midwives all over the country, sharing their deeper meaning here at the threshold of life.
Let's go first to Texas.
Longtime midwife and birth center owner Kathy is going to tell us a couple stories. One about getting out of her house to get to a birth center, where a photo of her went viral on the internet. And the other story about finding care with midwives for a mom who was refused at a hospital during a flood. Midwives are some of the most dependable people on the planet, and this story illustrates that. Let's listen in.
Hello, I'm Kathy Rude, and I'm a midwife, a certified professional midwife. I'm a licensed midwife in the state of Texas. I live in Katy, Texas, which is a suburb of Houston. And I have a story to tell you about something that happened to me involving the elements back in 2016. That year, we had 3 major floods in the Houston area. And I believe it was the second flood we had that year, which was on tax day. So it was April 15th. And we had a heavy rain with lots and lots and lots of flooding in the whole area. My street, I don't live very far from my birth center, Katy Birth Center, probably about 2 miles, but my street was completely flooded up to my doorstep. And I had a client that was due and early labor. This was her third baby, and I had delivered her second baby. Her first baby had been a C-section. So she had a VBAC with me with her second, and then this was her third baby. And so I told her, of course, I want to be there for you, but, I've got to figure out how I'm going to get to you because my street is flooded. And I could possibly have walked, but it was like, up to here, very deep. And I needed to carry my stuff with me and, my Doppler and the stuff that I needed, because probably when I got to the birth center, I was going to be at the birth center for probably 24 to 48 hours. So I was taking some food and different stuff with me. So I'm carrying these things, and I really just couldn't walk through that kind of water. She was getting concerned, the mom. Her name is Andrea. And of course, because she wanted to make sure that everything was going well for her birth. And so we were looking around to see if we could find a kayak to get me to float down my street. They had a really big truck with big wheels, and they were able to make it to the end of my street. It's a one street cul-de-sac. And they were able to get, even though it was high water, they were able to get to the end of my street, but they couldn't drive down my street and come get me because it was just too deep. So we were looking for a kayak. They had a friend that had one. They contacted them, but they were out saving people somewhere else and they couldn't get that kayak. By this time, it's in the afternoon and beautiful weather. Sun was shining. It was not raining, but it was just flooded. And one of my neighbors was floating on her inflatable swan down the middle of the street. And Andrea, the mom, saw her, and they were at the end of the street parked, and she yelled out at her and said, hey, can you help me? Can you go get my midwife and bring her to my truck so that she can deliver my baby? And her name is Celeste. And she knows me, and she grew up with my children. And she said, oh, Kathy, yeah, sure. I'll go get her. So Andrea called me on the phone and said, I've got a ride for you, and it's coming up to your door. And I said, okay. So I had all my stuff together, and I opened the door, and here's this little swan with Celeste on it right in front of me. And we both laughed and, talked about it for a minute, and she literally floated it up to my front door. I stepped on to the swan. I did not get wet. She got off, and so she was walking with it. And so she pushed me down to the end of the street, which is about 12 or 15 houses down. And so I would just float it along until we got to the end of the street. And then I was able to get into their truck. Again, I didn't even get wet, and but had all my stuff with me. And then we were able to slowly, through a very circuitous route, to take us through Katy until we could get to the birth center. And she had her baby. That was probably 3 or 4 in the afternoon, and she had her baby that evening, I think about 8 o'clock. Lovely water birth, and everything was beautiful. They were able to leave after the baby was born after several hours, and I couldn't. So I was stuck there, but I had brought all my stuff with me, and I stayed there. And the next day the water started draining, and my husband was able to come and pick me up and take me home. We had another situation that happened. I'm trying to remember if it was that flood, because we had so many floods. And then the very next year we had Harvey, which was even a worse flood. But I think maybe it was with Harvey, but we had a plan. So we were, when somebody would call and it was the middle of that, it was pouring rain and all the streets were flooded, you couldn't get anywhere. The plan was for the client to go to the closest hospital to deliver. And if we could make it there to help them, we would. But that was that was the plan. So one of the other midwives that are in our center had a client that went into labor during that flood. And so they went and were able to get to the hospital closest to them. And they went in there and the hospital said, we can't take anybody in. They refused to take a laboring woman that, they said, no, we can't do it. Just turned her away, even though she was in the hospital, walked in. And so we were calling around frantically, and there's a birth center fairly close to that hospital. They were able to get to that birth center. One of their midwives was able to get there, and she, delivered their baby. But we were really appalled that the hospital did that. They said, we're on drive-by. No, we can't take anybody.
Now we're going to take a trip to the South with Audrey. Usually in South Carolina, it's warm and sunny and balmy and pleasant, but not this year. This particular year, there was a severe ice storm that caused power outages and downed power lines. And yet, labors still happen. Somehow, midwives and families always find a way. Let's listen in.
I'm Audrey Trecaccioni. I am a certified professional midwife and licensed in the state of South Carolina, where I've been for about 2.5 years. I've been a midwife. I've been a CPN since 1998. So I've had lots of adventures and lots of wonderful stories. And one of the things that I wanted to share was that I feel like Ina May taught me how to tell birth stories. Like she said, when you talk amongst women, you're going to tell, wonderful, uplifting things that are encouraging, and you're going to take all the terror and mystery out of birth by telling the real stories that actually happened. And so I really thought that was impressive. And then I started looking at how storytelling helps us psychologically, that our memories are our memories, but the more we tell them, the more we build around the story. And then, I really like telling stories, and I embellish them a bit for dramatic effect, but all the events are real. And, the names have been withheld for privacy, except for mine. And I really enjoyed, living and working in the South, where we always have good weather. We get some bad thunderstorms once in a while, but this one year we had the ice storm from hell, and our community was a little unprepared. And a third-time mom was far away from me, over an hour away, so I had to drive really slow to get there as the ice was accumulating, and there were all these warnings, and I didn't have the right tires on my car, and there wasn't a lot of salting and scraping going on yet. So I was terrified that I wasn't going to make it in time. Well, when I got there, their power was already out, because it only takes a 1/4 inch of ice on those lines to kill everything. So, and this is back in the day when we weren't too worried about internet or cell phones. We just, it flew by the seat of our pants. If someone called us, we just went, we didn't have constant contact. So it also knew I wasn't able to call for help very easily. So the power's out. The mom's labor has stalled because she's terrified, but I'm there safely. And we start thinking about how are we going to make tea? And then it starts to get cold in the house, and we're like, how are we going to keep warm? How are we going to have water? How are we going to have anything that we need for the birth? And so the mom is stricken with terror, and she turns to her husband and says, do you think we'd have to go to the hospital? Because we don't have electricity. So he gets on the phone and starts calling the power company and said, look, we're about to have a baby. You really need our power back on. And they just kind of laughed at him. And so I just said a silent prayer that maybe we could build a fire in the fireplace, or maybe, we could find a generator or some, batteries. And now at this point, we're using our flashlights, which we know are going to go out soon. They have a few candles. But she says, no, the fireplace, has never been inspected. The chimney's probably cracked. I can just see that, the toxic smoke would be bothersome to me. And I guess we'll have to try to get to the hospital. And then I turned to the dad and I said, is that what you want to do? Is drive out here in this with her and labor? And he said, you know what? We have a propane heater in the shed. I was like, you do? And so he calls his mother who lives nearby and she has one too. Long story short, wonderful story short, we heated up one room. We used our flashlights and had a beautiful birth right by the heater in the dead of winter with lots of ice, rainy. And I just was so thankful for, the provisions that we did have, the food that was still in the fridge that was okay, and plenty of blankets, and all the things that we do to prepare for a birth don't even really come into play. We hardly take all that stuff out of our car, but we carry it around and we always have it, and we always make sure everything's okay for mom and baby. So even with disastrous weather, we had a beautiful outcome, and then we didn't have to go to the hospital. Nothing was a problem. And then when the power came back on the next morning, that's when we made tea and did the laundry and cleaned everything up. But our propane heaters lasted through the night, so we were able to stay at home for the birth.
Sometimes home is a precarious place, and many of us have done deliveries in hotels and Airbnbs. I've attended births in a horse barn and a teepee, and sometimes home is really impermanent. Let's take a trip to Florida and listen to Vicki as she tells the story of attending a birth and then not having a home to come back and visit the next day.
I started in 1974 in rural West Virginia. I have to say that one of the most impressive ones to me was very early when I started practicing in Pensacola. I had a delightful couple who were American Indians, both by birth, and they were very young. They were maybe 20 and 17, but very much into their heritage. Both sets of parents were obviously full-blooded Indian. And so they had American Indian, and they had very definite ideas of how they wanted this birth to work. And I ended up delivering the 2 sons and a daughter for them. But the first one was really interesting. We had the baby at her mother's house, which was actually a double wide trailer right on the river. And I was told by this gentleman that my spirit was a wolf spirit in the Indian thing. I don't know anything about that, to be honest with you, but I respected his opinion. And as I went to the home visit, I came up the front steps to the trailer, and they opened the door, and I was met by a full-grown white wolf that had been the girl's wolf, her pet, since she was like 5 or 6. This wolf had grown up with her, and beautiful, just gorgeous, blue eyes, and just, oh, it was really beautiful. And they opened the door, and I saw the wolf, and I said, okay. And she said, no, come on in. And I went in, and I said, is it okay if I acknowledge her? And she said, oh, you can pet her. You can pet her. If you made it through the door, you're good. So we went in, did the home visit, met everybody, figured out what we were going to be doing. She went into labor. She was a first-time mom with that first baby. It was a boy. We didn't know that, but it was a boy. And she went into labor and labored kind of quietly overnight. Rather stoic for a young lady who was maybe just turned 18 at that point. She had her act together. They also had a cradle board for the baby, and the dad had literally made a special knife to cut the cord with. That was very important to them. And nobody was to say anything about what sex the baby was because they didn't know. I thought, okay, I can do that. I can do that. So they kept the parents, both sets of parents, out on the other side of the house. And at one point, things were going a little slow, and I decided I would go out and take a cat nap in front of the fireplace. So I lay down in front of the fireplace with a pillow from the couch and put my arms up on it. And then there was this thing laying beside me. And I realized the wolf had followed me out of the room and stretched out and laid next to me. I thought, okay, I can do this. I can do this. And 20 minutes, 25 minutes later, I heard noises that meant I had to get back into the room. And I got up and the wolf followed me right back in there. And here comes this beautiful bouncing baby boy. He was like 8, 12. He was a good sized baby. And he comes out and he's absolutely fine. And I didn't say a word. Nobody around us said a word. The parents weren't even in there. They had no idea. And nobody said anything about the fact that it was a boy. And as the baby came out, she reached down and picked him up kind of underneath of the arms and sort of held him in front of her. And the wolf, who was standing next to me, howled. And her 4 male puppies, who were right outside the back door, also howled. And they howled probably for a minute or so, all of them in unison, howling and howling and howling. And the hair was standing up on the back of my neck. And I thought, oh, this is just so cool. And I said, what, do you have a name? And his name is River. Only his name is River in Lakota because that's what they are. And I can't say it. So, and the next day we had a major hurricane and a flood, and that whole house was gone. The whole house we had the birth in was swept away in the flood the next day.
Wow.
I told them that morning and I said, what are y'all going to do about the flood? And she said, we're gone. We're going someplace else. We got a place. We're taking the wolves all with us, blah, blah, blah. And her parents were gone and everything. And literally the Blackwater River took house and the whole 9 yards.
Enjoying this content and listening to Midwives? Then join us in Colorado. This November, we're going to have our 2nd annual Midwifery Wisdom Experience, which is so much more than a conference. We'll be in Denver, Colorado from November 8th to the 17th. Tickets are still available, so check out our website, midwiferywisdom.com. You can sign up for the conference the 10th, 11th, and 12th. You can take advanced NRP on November 10th. And we have 6 post-conference workshops that really can't be missed. First, ultrasound basics for midwives with Amarie Collins. Next, shoulder dystocia with Nicole Morales, and an opportunity to take spinning babies with the incredible Nicole Morales. We have a comprehensive breech birth intensive with Breech Without Borders and the amazing Dr. Rixa Fries. And then everything a midwife needs to run a successful midwifery practice with Leslie Cornwell from Midwifery Business Consultations. And finally, we have the incredible duo Mariah Mellon and Danny Lavore teaching the art of death keeping for birth workers. This is a conference that has over 30 speakers and some incredible breakout sessions. Our 2 keynotes are Kristen Eflin speaking on equity in midwifery education, and Dr. Sanel Pentel talking about the 4th trimester, specifically the economics of the 4th trimester as a home visiting neonatologist herself. You don't want to miss these presentations. We have an incredible store. We have a group of vendors who are going to tell you all about their amazing products. We have a graduation ceremony and hand blessing for our new graduates in midwifery. And we have some incredible evening entertainment. This is the midwife event of the year. Please come join us. I'll see you in Denver.
Well, now I've got a story for you. I used to live on the island of Maui, and live is kind of a strong word. What I really mean is I bought a 1998 shuttle bus, ripped out all 26 seats, and turned it into a mobile tiny house / clinic I know it sounds ridiculous, but I really did do that back in 2017, 18, 19. In 2018, Hurricane Lane was a very powerful cyclone that brought torrential rainfall and strong winds around the end of August in 2018. And it was actually ended up being the wettest storm on record in all of Hawaii. And it had peak rainfall of 58 inches in Hawaii. And Lane was a Category 5 hurricane and had sustained winds that were crazy strong. And of course, I was on call for clients. And it was a time of uncertainty because I was living in a vehicle. So I chose to go to the kind of the opposite side of the island from where the storm was coming, just kind of wait it out. It did downgrade to not a Category 5 when it hit, but there were still winds of 160 miles per hour. It was really crazy. And of course, we were watching the weather with, clients who were getting ready to have babies. I had one client who lived on the opposite side of the island. She actually lived in Lahaina. And she is one of the many very, very unfortunate families who have lost everything they own in Lahaina with the most recent crazy experience of the fires. So this is the story of her and how she made it through that crazy time. So we were watching the weather and her labor started and I went to her house and this was her first home birth, her third baby. And she was so strong and so powerful. And she just learned how to turn in and let go. And she had 2 boys already. And when she had her baby girl, it was just like celebration and triumph and like oneness with the world. And her sweet husband was there supporting her. And it was just like a magical birth. And then the winds picked up. And the day after she had her baby, maybe it was 2 days later, but I'm pretty sure the day after she had her baby, she had to evacuate and go stay somewhere higher up in the mountains because of the risk of flooding and storm damage and wind damage and rain. There was so much rain. It was the most rain, I think, that ever fell at one time in Hawaii. The rivers were all a torrent. And it was a scary moment. And I think for midwives, it's like so hard to imagine, like, how do we help people when we're busy helping ourselves? Or how do we advise people when we're afraid too? Or, the constant challenge of balancing having faith and having trust, but also being smart and making plans. So it was quite a moment. I think we were all so relieved when everything passed and everyone was okay. And I have this memory of kind of snuggling up with her in bed after she finally got back home, I think like 4 days postpartum. And we just kind of hit reset and just like encouraged her to do her postpartum again, like start over, do skin to skin, be naked, climb in bed, do nothing else. Yeah, she had a water birth. And so it was like water times 100, this birth. And then just a month later, like in mid-September, Hurricane Olivia, a Category 4 hurricane, also hit Hawaii, causing really severe flooding and wind damage. And Olivia was the first tropical cyclone to make landfall directly on Maui in all recorded history. And it was just such a time of like so much water and wind. Some of the storm surges, like the waves were like the highest they'd ever seen. And for the week after both hurricanes, we would go to the point and like watch the surfers on these like crazy 30, 40-foot waves. And I remember thinking like, I think this was the time in Maui when I learned that I actually wanted to stop trying to attract abundance, right? We hear a lot about like, oh, I want it to be abundant. And I'm like, I'm manifesting abundance. And that sounds great when we're talking about like love or sunshine or something like that. But when we're talking about abundance, we can't control where it shows up. And I think that was the biggest lesson that I learned from that water deluge time, is that we can't control when it shows up or how much it shows up. And so we have to be really careful with that word, abundance. And I started meditating instead on the idea of enough. I want enough rain so that my seeds sprout, and I want enough sun so that they can grow. And I want enough clouds so that, we don't get sunburned, but I need my vitamin D. So it's like a balance, right? Like that's what life is. And I think that's what midwifery brings, is like this reminder of the balance. So my water story is about remembering that we can't control where abundance shows up. So that's nothing, the thing to meditate on. Instead, we meditate on enough. And I want to take this time to ask everyone who's listening to really consider donating to my friends who are still on Maui, still beginning the recovery efforts for their homes and their businesses and their lives. We have a link, fundraising project going on our Instagram. So if you go check out Midwifery Wisdom on Instagram, you can donate to the Pacific Birth Collective, which is a nonprofit raising money to help displaced families, and also gives a direction and a place for the midwives and the doulas of Maui to continue to help the families who need it. Big aloha to my friends in Hawaii. You've made it through so many challenges. I know that the aloha spirit is really strong, and I know that they can make it through this one too. So sending my love far and wide. And thanks for listening.
We're going to go north to rural Michigan, and we're going to listen to Valerie as she tells us the story of her last catch in her student journey during a really extreme blizzard, and really look at the indomitable nature of this profession. They say it's a calling. Nothing could be further from the truth. You go when you're called, even at own personal risk, braving the elements, this time a massive blizzard.
My name is Valerie Maharg. I am a new CPM and a licensed midwife in Northeast Michigan in the United States, in a very rural area. So we don't even have a red light in the whole county. It's sparse. And it's cold here. So last December, I was on call for a birth that would have been my last catch as a student. And it had been snowing like crazy for about 4 days. And they were telling everybody, don't travel, of course. And this particular client she lived about 10, 12 minutes from my home on normal roads, and 2.5 hours from my preceptor. So it was Christmas Eve, about 11:30 p.m. And my preceptor called to give me a heads up to say that she was getting on the road to head there. We always plan to arrive together whenever possible. So she started driving, and I tried to lay down and rest for a little while, which didn't really work because I was so worried about the weather. It got really bad. And you usually check with your friends or on social media or whatever to say, have you been out? You've been this direction. Do you know how the roads are? And like nobody had been out. They're like, no, of course we haven't. That's crazy. Stay home. So I was trying to figure out how long it would take my preceptor to get there in the snowstorm, but I didn't really want to call her or text her because I knew what she was driving through. So just kind of guessing and started to get myself ready. And I headed out, gave myself a little extra time to get there from when I thought she would. I hadn't heard from her. My husband was out away from home working because he's a lineman, and this storm had knocked out a bunch of power. So he left me his big truck. We knew this was a possibility that I'd be driving in that. And I got on the main road to start going, and it was nasty. It was snowing sideways. There was snow on the road, and it was so windy that snow was blowing up into big drifts, big piles on the road, on the side of the road. It was very slow going, taking my time. Did not see another car. There was not a soul on the road. So you start having all the thoughts like, can I make it there? What if I get stuck? Will I be stuck till tomorrow? What if we have an emergency? Can an ambulance make it to this client's home? So just having all those, all the thoughts that you get. And I turned off the main road to go the shortest way to their house. And at some point, there was just this huge snowdrift. I stopped early enough that I didn't get too stuck. I was a little bit stuck. I rocked the truck back and forth a few times, got out, and was able to back up enough to turn around very carefully. I couldn't even see the edges of the road anymore at all. Could hardly see anything. So very slow, very careful. Backtrack to the main road to go around the other way, which is longer, but it was the only option. So about that time, I think it was about the time that we thought we'd be arriving. So my preceptor managed to let me know that she was obviously having a hard time as well. And she wasn't sure when she'd even make it. And I told her what just happened to me and kind of told her, like, don't go down that road because you won't get through. Took my time going around the other way. And I was just pure adrenaline at that point. I was a little shaky. And again, all the thoughts, what if I can't make it? What if they need an ambulance and they can't make it? Just thinking everything over and over. Finally get there, and clients are fine. It was this young, sweet, healthy Amish couple, but she was very clearly in well-established labor and things were moving along. So I updated them on my preceptor and still didn't want to call her again because I knew I didn't want to try to make her use her phone while she was driving. We got set up, calmed down a little bit, and then they asked me if I would go pick up their Amish friend that's interested in getting into birth work. And I was like, I knew it was the plan, but I thought, oh gosh, I have to go drive down the road again. But I did. I went and I got her. I drove right past her house. It was snowing so hard. And I know right where this house is. And I drove right past things I couldn't see. But got turned around, picked her up, back to the house. There's an assistant that we were working with to get her ready to work with me when I got my license. So I let her know that the labor was happening and that she could head out if she thought she could make it, but that it was really bad and I wouldn't be mad if she couldn't. Told her which way was safest, which way I made it. And she eventually got there as well. I got back with the Amish friend, and the client had decided to get into her bathtub and was clearly progressing well. And she asked me to get her pool ready, like the real birth pool. So we're setting that up. And then at some point she said, I can't get out of my bathtub. I'm just going to stay here. So I'm thinking, okay, where's my preceptor? It's in the back of my head. This could be my last catch. I could be done today. And then at some point, the client's mom got there, and there's this raging snowstorm going on outside, but we're all huddled, there's 6 of us, including the mom, in this bathroom together, trying to not think about anything else and just let this birth unfold totally normally, which it did. And everything was fine. So I'm trying to keep myself calm about everything that just happened. And my preceptor probably not going to make it at this point. She did finally let me know I had my smartwatch on. She made it till about 5 minutes from the house and got completely stuck in the middle of the road. So I just made sure she was okay and then kept working, Well, when she finally made it to the house, at this point, it's already after 6 a.m., I think. And my preceptor got there after we had already got it, mom and baby, out of the tub and into the bed. And come to find out, the Amish friend that we brought over called her husband, and he had gathered a team of horses up and was going to go pull her out of the snowdrift. And right as he was getting there, 4 men from our county road commission also came upon her and was like, what are you doing out on the middle of the road? And when he found out why, he radioed a big snowplow to come and plowed her car out and then led the way and plowed all the way to the client's house so she could get there. So we were all a little bit, shaken up by our travels and just managed to just stay calm and get this baby born totally normally. The birth was great. The getting there was the really hard part. And then at some point it dawned on me like, man, I still need another birth now. But, it was January 10th. That was Christmas Day. And I finally got the last gift on January 10th. So it didn't take long. And so we have, another story.
And our last story for the water episode of the mini-series of Midwives and the Elements is in California. In fact, we're going to go deep into the mountains of Northern California and back about 40 years with midwife Lily. Be prepared to be transported and transfixed with this story about home birth midwifery before cell phones and even before paved roads in this area. It's the story of how midwives jump when they're called and head out into the unknown, figuratively and literally. Let's listen in.
Hello, everybody. I'm Lily Bhavani Aquarian, and I live in the mountains of Northern California, really far north. California being so long, we're way up in the northern part. We're actually only about an hour and a half from the Oregon border. So when people think of California, they think beach, Malibu, where I grew up in Southern California, but we're really different. We're way up in the mountains, and we're an hour from any town. Our homestead, we have a large homestead. We're some of those original back to the landers that happened in the 60s and 70s, especially in California. And within that, back to the lander idea, we all, moved out on far homesteads and built our own houses and, grew our own food and had our own babies. And in doing that, I came to Humboldt County, California in 1974, and I was pregnant with my son. I was 18, just happened to happen. And I realized very early on that I did not want to give birth at home. In the hospital. I wanted to give birth at home, but not in the mountains. There was no infrastructure. So I moved to Berkeley, had him, and then moved back up in the spring of 1975. And it was kind of like, as soon as that happened, people just started having babies, just like tons of babies, just like, it was like time. It was just the right time. And we just kind of, meaning me and 2 other women, one had had a baby, one had not. One I went to high school with, and the other one I met in junior high school. So I'd known him for a long time. Jody was pregnant. Rebecca hadn't had a baby yet. And the 3 of us decided, wow, let's go sit next to that woman's bedside while she's in labor, kind of whatever that means. And that was our training. So it's very, very not common as far as the world of midwifery is now, but that's how it was then. It was kind of the story of, you know, have one, see one, do one. So I had a baby at home, saw Jody give birth, started catching babies. It was just like that. And there wasn't any real question about it. It was sort of interesting because, and it was really the time period. It's really not probably ever going to be repeated, especially on the West Coast. People were constantly, you know, going against the norm and changing it up. And there's the local hospital in our town of Garberville was, you know, super backwards, even for then, where Dad was still left at the door, you know, of the hospital. He couldn't even come in the hospital, this little tiny country hospital. So we had to fight against that. And what we did was just say, okay, screw you guys, we're just gonna have our babies at home. And one thing that did happen was we created our own clinic, and it was a few community members and midwives, and we created something called Revere's Rural Health Center. And it's still going 50 years later, and has all kinds of funding, and, you know, really takes care of the low income population and anybody. But as we were building that, and we would see loads of pregnant women, we just lay them out on the floor and next to each other and take turns, and the pregnant women would take turns, and we'd all feel bellies and just sort of figure out what was going on. If there was something that we couldn't figure out, we talked to some other midwives farther south. We all were taking classes. And one day, this beautiful, now I'm going to tell a story. One day, this beautiful Australian woman walked in to our little tiny clinic, and she was super petite and bubbly and just really just a twinkle. And she had this very tall, big, very solemn, shy kind of husband. And they just literally that moment had moved from Marin County, farther south, where they had had their first child, their 2-year-old son. And she came in just vastly pregnant, and she was so tiny. She was that kind of woman where she just is just like all belly, you know. And, oh, when are you due? And she says, oh, I think I'm due like maybe in about 2 weeks or so. She didn't have any records and, you know, all that kind of stuff. But she was very clear about how her last pregnancy had gone. So we wrote it all down. And then we said, where do you live? Oh, I live out in Petrolia, which is towards the coast from here. And a lot of us hadn't, this is like almost 40 years ago, this story goes back. And a lot of us hadn't been all the way out in our vast reaches of our community because the roads are bad and 2-hour windy, you know, mountain roads and all that. So at that time, there were about 6 of us in this little informal collective. And we all looked at each other and, have you been to Petrolia? No, I've never been to, I've been to Edinburgh. Well, I've been, you know, everybody was kind of like, so everybody was like, well, okay, we'll just figure it out. We have a couple weeks, we'll just figure it out. Okay, well, let's make a home visit. Okay, somebody go out and make a home visit. So we figured out a home visit. And of course, this wonderful woman went into labor that night. So all of our plans were dashed. You know, we didn't even have time to get her a birth kit or anything. And it happened to be, I'm trying to remember, I'm pretty sure it was March. So it wasn't like the middle of winter, which can be very rainy and sometimes snowy here. But the rivers were pretty big, and it was, you know, still shorter days and that kind of thing. And when we get you know, bear in mind, everybody, this is way before cell phones or even very good landlines. And we're talking about a very rural area where there's not a lot of traffic or cars or great vehicles. With CB radios, and that's often how we connected, or we would call on our regular phone, or somebody would call us and they would call to somebody with a CB, and then they would go and run to the person's house or something like that. That's usually how it happened. So one night I get a phone call. I think this woman had just kind of gone down the line, the list of who was available, and a couple other midwives were in births or out of town. One woman was still on maternity leave. So Mary and I went out, and they gave us this real cryptic message, through a second party. Margie's in labor, this woman's in labor, she's having contractions. They're about 5 minutes apart. We're thinking, oh gosh, second baby, okay. Of course, it's the middle of the night, super dark. And I, contacted Mary, and she and I met in town together, and we got into one car. I think it was my car. I'm pretty sure I was driving. And we just started driving. So to get there, you go through this mountain area, lots of redwoods along the river. And then you go up this higher mountain called Panther Gap. And then you go down into this gorgeous valley. I mean, it's just so beautiful there. You're right on the edge of the ocean. It's the westernmost part of the United States, actually, of California, and of all the United States, the contiguous United States, not including Alaska. And we're just, really literally just driving out to the middle of the edge of nowhere. And of course it's raining and foggy. And we get out there, and we've been given this very cryptic message, and we can't call it. It's not like on the cell phones now where we can just call somebody or text. Okay, I'm, 2 miles out. Do I make that left turn there? No, we're just blindly, literally. Fortunately, of course, Grace was with us. And that's just how I've always seen it, where we got to this person's house on this little dark, back narrow street of this little tiny place. And we stopped. And sometimes I tell this story and I think, it sounds a little like I could have made it up, but it really isn't. And I feel like I've tried really hard not to embellish it, which is so easy to do over the 40 years it's been, or 38 years, something. But Mary and I both, have rechecked each other over the years. And we get out of the car, and we've got our umbrella and raincoats. We're trying to keep our 2 bags, dry and get the oxygen. And this really tall, he was 6'6", tall, white-haired man, who I came to know later, Rex, kind of just appears out of the mist. And he says, hello, I'm going to escort you to the birth, to the Smiths. And we were like, oh, okay, great. That sounds great. So we've got all this stuff, and he's looking at our stuff. He's not very impressed. And he looks at us and he's like, come on into the back of the house. My wife has some boots for you. We're like, okay, So we we should have been a clue. We get to the back porch, and sure enough, she's got this row of rubber boots of different sizes and lengths, and she's like, pick a pair. And we're like, okay. So we're thinking, well, it's Humboldt County, maybe we have to trudge through the mud, I don't know. So yeah, we put our bags down, we get our boots on, trudging down. He says, we just have to go down this little path. Okay, we go down this little path. Have you heard from this woman? Yes, she's still in labor. She's doing great. She's really excited to have you arrive, or something like that. We're like, okay. We go down this path, with a flashlight, with bags, and he's carrying some stuff. We go down to this river, which we can't really see because it's dark and foggy, but we can hear it going along. I'm like, okay, this is super interesting. Well, maybe we're just gonna, take a truck that's there that goes along the river. I don't know what we thought. And we get down there, and Rex has this rubber raft. It's not even a boat. It's a rubber raft, one of those inflatable rafts, a pretty large one. And he proceeds to pull it in and starts loading our bags into it, just real matter-of-factly, like we've done this 100 times. And we're like, where are we going? Oh, well, we have to row this short stretch across the Mattole River, and then we're going to, and Margie's husband's going to meet us on the other side in his 4-wheel drive truck, and then he'll drive us up to the farmhouse. And we're like, okay. I think because it was that many years ago, we were 20 something. It was like, oh, sure, why not? Okay, so we just got in and trusted all our stuff would stay dry, and we would stay dry, and we wouldn't dunk off. The eeriness of it, of course, is accentuated by the fact that it's dark and foggy. And on the river, there's always like a little mist, often. And so it was just complete blind trust and faith in this beautiful older man. It was just, and we got in, he just starts rowing across, and He does perfectly. Obviously, he's done this hundreds of times. And we get over to the other side. It's not a long row. It's bigger in my mind. It's maybe 10 minutes or something. And it wasn't treacherous. The river was flowing, but it wasn't like rapids or anything like that. And we get across, and again, when we get partway across, we can see headlights through the mist. And it's the husband of the woman in labor shining his truck headlights out on the water. And that was helping Rex, navigate and get over there. And we got over there, and, the dad helps pull up the boat and grabs our bags. And he's like, yeah, Marky's like, she's just like breathing and walking around. And we're like getting a little anxious at this point. Like, we got there, let's get up there. And we're like, great. Okay. So we get into his truck. He's like a kind of a high pickup truck, all our stuff in there, gear up there, and go up this muddy track up to this farmhouse with the sheep all over. They were sheep farmers. And well, I guess the sheep were in the barn at that point. The next day we saw the sheep out, but at that moment we didn't see anything. And we come up to this farmhouse, lit by kerosene lamps. They didn't have electricity still, or even solar electricity yet. It was still by kerosene lamp. And we go into this very nice wood stove warmed house, and there's this beautiful petite woman, and she labored for another like 12 hours. So we had loads of time to get there. And sometime the next day, it was beautiful, beautiful day. It actually ended up being sunny. We were able to look out and see where we actually were, and see the river going by and the sheep in the fields, and play with her toddler. And she had a beautiful birth. And I went there twice more. And for her third baby, unfortunately, she always had long labor. She always had at least 12-hour labor. She never had anything shorter than that. And she had big babies, 8.5, 9-pound babies, even though she was this teeny little thing. And that's also what was beautiful. Her Australian mother was always there. And she was this beautiful, older, short woman. And she would just have these gorgeous expressions. Oh, Moggy, you're so clever. She would just be so beautiful. And the second birth, it was summertime. It was like July, I think, or something. So we were able to drive across the river. We didn't have to take the boat. And same thing again. Rex met me there and drove me across in the truck and went up to the farmhouse. And by the third birth, a couple of years later, they had gotten permission to get the road in to their house. There was this whole land dispute with its rancher neighbor and all that. And so finally, by that time, they had a road put in, and I had 2 more babies by then of my own. So I just brought the whole family, brought my husband, the 2 kids, and my teenager. And we all became friends. Obviously, we're all really good friends. That's my elemental water story.
And don't we just all become friends? Being a midwife is one of the most special professions in the world, because we start out as strangers, and through the course of holding space, drinking tea, gazing at bellies and babies, we build some of the most strongest bonds between midwives and each other and their students and their clients and the families. To this day, I still get emails, messages from grandmothers who I stood next to as we watched their daughters welcome their babies. And the connections and the brilliance, it's hard to understate. It's an incredible journey. Thanks for listening to our water stories, and be sure to tune in next week when we explore the next element in our Midwives and the Elements mini-series.